My name's Nia and I'm an outreach librarian in Oxford. And what I'm going to do today is just quickly introduce you to the basics of doing a literature search and hopefully make you feel comfortable with asking for more help from your local NHS or healthcare library with this process. So we're going to go through this step by step. So thinking about your topic and your question, which I think you've been looking at already today, doing the quick and dirty searches that might inform that, finalizing your question and going right through then to developing a search strategy, thinking about where to search, whether you want journal articles, whether you want grey literature and how to go about that, and then making sure that you're super organized with collating all the references and the results so that they're in a form that you can then go on to analyze them and synthesize them. And at the end, I'll mention where you can get more help. So what I would say is that generally what you want to do is if you've got a broad question, you want to do some what we would call quick and dirty searches of literature just to get a feel for what is out there. And I would often do these either in PubMed or Google Scholar. Allows me to type simple queries and just get a feel for what's there. Definitely what you would want to do at this stage is check whether there are any existing systematic reviews, evidence reviews, scoping reviews that might help you focus your question, seeing where the research gaps are. It also, with the literature review, allows you to think about how big the potential topic is. If you're getting multiple thousands of results from your initial searches, you might want to think about narrowing down the question. But equally, if you only get 10, 20, 30 results, you might want to broaden out a little bit. So this is a very important part of the process to start. Also, we would hope at this stage that we'd find a small group of 5 to 10 papers that are really spot on, that really address your question, that give you some evidence for your question. And we're going to use those in different ways. We're going to use them by putting them either through some software or just eyeballing them for keywords, subject headings, title words, abstract words, how authors have described the topic so that you can build up your search strategy. But once you've built up that strategy, we're also going to use them as a check to make sure that you've constructed your strategy correctly. And we're going to use them as a check to make sure they are actually included in the search that you've come up with. So if we take this example on weight loss drugs, I would probably do lots of smaller searches. So the drug with weight loss, NHS related terms, weight loss drugs, NHS, just to see whether my change of quick keywords give me different results and to get me to think about where I actually want to focus my question. And as part of this, I'll be selecting relevant papers that come up and then adding to that group any that I already know exist. So depending on the type of review you're doing, you'd want to finalize your question. And some of these frameworks can help both in finalizing and focusing the question, but also in helping us hang the search strategy around it. So they're by no means essential, but they can help to focus the mind and identify the key aspects that we would put into our search. So we would use different tools depending on the type of review that we're aiming to do at the end. So particularly if you've got a broad topic, that something like PCC that's suitable for scoping reviews is much better than PICO that's very much focused on intervention questions. So I'm just giving two examples here of how we're looking at a very similar topic, but our questions are slightly differently, and how one framework is more appropriate than the other. So a very focused intervention question, PICO, works really well here in identifying who our population target group is. What's the intervention? Is there a control? And what our final outcome is. But the PCC is more fluid. So if we're looking at the population again, it's the same, but we've got a broader concept for barriers and facilitators of implementation. And our context is very specific to the UK and to the NHS. So it allows you to think about both your question and also your search terms here. And I would say that if you need extra help, I would do all of that preliminary work. So the scoping out, deciding on your question, gathering certain evidence. You can start on this element of building up your search strategy yourself at this stage, or you can at this stage go and see your local librarian. Once you've done the preliminary searches, this is a good stage to get some advice on how to build your search strategy and where to search. I wouldn't go to see them before you've done your preliminary scoping searches. So within our search strategy, we want to make sure that the key elements of the question are represented. It doesn't mean that if we were doing a PICO, that we would put everything in. It may be that we go for the population intervention and the outcome, or the population intervention and the control, just to make sure that we don't miss anything. Obviously, the outcome here, weight loss, can be described in lots of different ways. So if we were worried about missing things, we might not add that in. But we'd at least want to identify the key questions. You'd want to do some brainstorming of keywords. So as I've said previously, you can look at the title and abstracts of your relevant papers and pick out keywords for each of the same the key concepts. You can also do this in something like ChatGPT. You can ask ChatGPT, give me synonyms for Ozempic, give me synonyms for weight loss, and that might give you a start on building up some keywords to put into your final search strategy. I wouldn't use ChatGPT to search for articles because it has a tendency to either be too broad, but also to hallucinate references. And that's not something that you want to be able to having to deal with when you're doing your review. If you take your relevant articles and have a look at the PubMed records, you'd be able to also find what mesh terms or subject headings are used. And if there's consistency across keyword mesh terms, then you'd want to incorporate those into your search strategy as well. We need to be very careful how we put our search strings together so that it's a comprehensive, sensitive search, but also being precise so we're not getting too many irrelevant papers. And then weigh up whether you want to apply limits. So is it useful to limit by date, by language, by study type, for example? There are dangers in doing that, in that you're introducing bias. But for example, if a certain standard or guideline came out at a particular time, you may want to search from the start or the publication of that guideline or the introduction of that service or intervention. So this is what you would tend to come up with if you're doing a structured search. This is from Medline via Ovid. So in step one, we've got the mesh search for all the different types of anti-obesity drugs. So you'll see it's exploded. We've got EXP at the beginning there, which means that it looks for all the individual drugs within there. Obviously, you do a more specific search if you wanted to look at specific agents. In line 2, we've got the title, abstract, and author keyword search. And we've looked here both for the generic name and for the brand names where appropriate. And the annotation at the back, at the end, TI, AB, KF, title, abstract, author, keyword searches. And these two lines are synonymous, so we're putting them together in line 3. So we've got an overarching sets for anti-obesity agents. And then we do exactly the same thing for our weight loss. So we've got the mesh search first, then we've got the title, abstract, keyword search. I would say that this line probably needs a little bit more work. We might want to put keywords in around reduction in BMI, for example, into that line. Again, we put that set together in line 6, so we've got an overarching set for our outcome. And then in line 7, we're bringing them together so that we get the overlap. So we're only getting the anti-obesity agents where they also mention weight loss. You'll see I've demonstrated here how you can apply limits. So I've applied a publication limit for scoping reviews and systematic reviews, just to see what's out there. And then I've further limited by English language and date. So where you're going to search is going to be very useful for you to think about. You don't want to miss anything, but again, you don't want to be too broad. You will have access to the Knowledge and Library Hub as NHS staff. And you can register for an NHS Open Athens account to register for this. If you happen to also be based at a university, there will be a similar system within your university system. So through the NHS Open Athens account, you get access to things like the Cochrane Library, CINAHL and MCare, which are nursing allied health databases, Embase and Medline via Ovid, that are general medical healthcare databases, but also specialist databases for psychology, mental health, social care, social work as well. And there's also information on there on grey literature, so things like organisational reports, policy documents, if it's useful to incorporate those into your review. We don't only identify our material for our literature reviews through active searching. Once we find relevant papers, we might have a list at the end. We might consider doing some snowballing, so citation tracking or general web searching as well. So for citation searching, we would talk about 2 different ways. So backwards is looking at the reference lists of included studies to see if there's anything relevant within there. And for forward, we would think about seeing who has cited any of our substantially relevant studies so that we can go forward in time and pick up any missing studies from there. We also have the ability to use the algorithms within databases to link through to similar or related articles. And PubMed and Google Scholar are very good sources for all 3 of these ways of searching. Google Scholar is particularly strong for the forward citation searching. There's some of that in PubMed, but there is definitely more in Google Scholar because it goes out to the wider literature, whereas in PubMed it's only journals and material available within PubMed that you can do it. You may also want to do some general web searching, some Google searching, particularly, if there's a commercial element, if you're exploring new technologies or new drugs, then searching the commercial literature might be useful. You can also use Google to do site searches within organizational websites, if that's something that you want to do. Also, you can use web searching for identifying current guidelines, that kind of thing, that tend not to be always indexed in the bibliographic databases like Medline and Embase. And then to keep organized, I would say that as a minimum, you need some kind of reference management software. It can help put everything in one place. You can use it to organize references in different groups. It also helps when you're writing up, whether it's a proposal or an article or your final report of your research. It allows you to integrate with Word or Google Docs and insert citations and have them automatically formatted for things like by Harvard or Vancouver reference styles. So as a minimum, I would say reference management software. We have some open source ones, so Mendeley and Zotero. EndNote is one that you have to pay for and you would download, but some of you might have access to that. And then you can inquire about RefWorks through your local NHS library because it is available to researchers in the NHS via your local NHS library. So lots of different options there. There's no one substantially better than the other. They have very many of the same functions. You have to just fit them around how you work. And then particularly if you're thinking of doing a systematic review, a scoping review, then review management software becomes useful because you can invite team members to help you with screening or data extraction. And again, there's a subscription version that some universities have called Covidence, but we have free versions, Rayan and Catchy, that have very similar functions as well. So last slide, if you want more help, then your local healthcare or NHS library will be able to help you. They'll have librarians on site who'll be able to give you help and advice on the databases that are open to you, how to build up your search strategy. But we also have a site called Library Resources for Researchers, pointing you in the direction of help for NHS researchers, and that includes video tutorials. In Oxford, we've got a couple of guides that are open for anybody to look at, and the medical researchers resources do have video tutorials on how to use some of the databases.